My name is, can you hear me without this thing? You good? No? You can't hear me without it. You need it. Okay. You need it. Okay. I'll use it. My name is Jeff Thielman, and I'm a member of the Arlington School Committee and the chairperson of the Arlington High School Building Committee. And I'd like, and we've been working now for several months, maybe a year, as a committee. And tonight we have a chance to get input on different design plans. And I'll explain the process in a minute. I want to just have all the members of the committee stand up for a minute and just acknowledge them. Maybe just say your names real fast. Okay, and we also have folks here, did I miss somebody? Frank. Great, thank you, Frank. And the principal of the school. We also have folks here from HMFH, our architectural team. And your colleague isn't here? No. Arthur is back there. And Melissa, thank you. And then Skanska, Jim Burrows, Victoria. So we've all been working as a team, and we're excited to get input from the community. Tonight, we're going to get your input on 8, did we decide? All 8 or 7? 7 or 8 different options that we would like your input on because we have to make a decision about further exploration of these options. So we're not picking an option tonight, but we're getting input from the community on which options to further study, which options we want our architects to further study. I want to kind of just give you an overview of where we're at in the process. We're in the feasibility study stage. And this summer, we're going to submit our preferred option to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And in a few weeks, we're going to be presenting them with 3 options to let them know what we're going to be studying. Then we send them our preferred option. Hopefully, we reach an agreement with them sometime in the end of August. The MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, provides assistance to the town of Arlington, technical assistance to the town of Arlington, and they provide us some money as reimbursement. We don't know what that rate will be right now. We've been using different numbers, but it could be 35%, it could be 30%, it could be 40%. We don't know at this time what the reimbursement rate will be from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We try to maximize that in the process. The plan right now is to go for a vote before the voters in the spring of 2019 to ask the voters of the town to support the project. And every single community in the Commonwealth that has had an MSBA vote has had a successful vote. We expect that'll be the case here in Arlington, but we won't take it lightly. We'll campaign hard, and we'll do our best to educate everyone in the community about the project. All of the options you're seeing tonight have a price range based on square footage, a preliminary price range of between $285 and $310 million. That's would be an average increase in taxes on the average household of about $760, $770, assuming a 35% reimbursement rate. I want to get that out because it's a real preliminary number. It almost means nothing, and it's not what we're going to talk about tonight. So we're not going to have a conversation about price, what things are going to cost. The price will be impacted, the price of the building will be impacted by what we build and where we build it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was community support. We want to make sure we get everybody in the community involved in this project as early as possible. We want to hear from people. We want to hear about any concerns that people might have and any ideas that people might have. One concern that has come up from parents is what will happen to my child when she or he is attending Arlington High School and there's a building project going on. They will still have to go to school, and they'll still get an education. We've done this before with modular classrooms at the Stratton School and in the Thompson School, and they were great places to teach in, great places for learning, And so if we go that option with the high school, there'll be very nice places for students to learn and very nice places for teachers to teach. We will look at other options. The Minuteman project is winding down. That school could be something that we would look at, and it's a possibility that we might put some students there. We might get engaged in a conversation to put students there. But the bottom line and the most important thing to understand, the education continues. Students are going to be educated, and they're going to have a fine educational experience. So don't take your kids out of Arlington High School because of this project. The name of the school will still be the Spy Ponders, no matter what we build. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage. Tonight's conversation is to get educated about our process and to get your input into 7 or 8 different options to see which of those options should be further studied by the committee and the architectural team that is working with the committee. Okay. Lori, do you want to stand up there, or do you want to? Yeah.
Adam, you're next.
Okay. Adam's next. Ladies and gentlemen, the town manager, Adam Chapdelaine.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Again, my name's Adam Chapdelaine. I'm the town manager, also serving on the building committee. So my job tonight is to just walk through some consideration we gave to whether or not the existing site of the high school was the best or most preferred site in town for the construction project. So you will see tonight the options that are going to be presented are all on the existing high school site. Because we did an assessment and determined it was the most preferable site, even with the challenges it had. But I want to just briefly talk about the process we went through to come to the conclusion that the existing site was the best site. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So we looked at, we brought before the committee 4 potential sites to look at. And when we brought those 4 sites, we also said that from a town administration point of view, we didn't think it would be appropriate to recommend looking at the town's large parks, such as Menotomy Rocks Park or Robbins Farm Park. Those are big open pieces of land, but given the priority for open space and recreation space in town, we made a recommendation, and the committee agreed at the outset to not look at those spaces. So with the guidance of the MSBA preferring 20-plus acre sites for a high school project, we looked at sites that came close to that amount of space throughout town. So on this map, you'll see we looked in East Arlington at the Mugar site, obviously a site of much discussion in town. Going along Route 2, we looked at the Poets Corner site, which is partially owned by the town, partially owned by St. Camillus Parish. We then looked at the suite of properties mostly owned by the Myrack family off Mass Ave, although there are some other properties owned by other landowners. And then we also looked at the Summer Street and Rink site, partially owned by the town and partially owned by the state where the rink is. So those are the 4 sites we looked at, of course, as well as the existing site. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So what the project team was able to do is overlay some massing in terms of what a building would look like in terms of space coverage on each site. So this is the Mugar property, and you can see the 3 varied boxes of whether or not it would be a 3, 4, or 5-story building to make up the necessary square footage on that site. Not at this point talking about wetlands or other concerns. You can see that's a pretty big amount of space to take up that would still have to also account for playing fields, traffic, circulation, parking, other needs on the site. So that was a challenge there. And the Mugar site is 16.1 acres, so it doesn't quite meet that 20-acre amount that's preferred by the MSBA. So if we can go to the next slide. This is Poets Corner. Poets Corner is combined actually only 11 acres, the combination of the 2 sites. So you can see that same massing, 3, 4, or 5 stories, much tighter than the Mugar property. Maybe better circulation options based on the proximity to Route 2 and the existing off-ramp, but pretty tight site and challenging for this project. Next slide. This is the Summer Street and Rink and Fields. You can see there, again, the massing with the 3 different options. This site is 14.43, very specific acreage of the combination of this site. So you can see there's an ability to get a building in there, again, quite tight, but not entirely impossible. And then the final site are the suite of MIRAC properties. This was the biggest, actually no, excuse me, not the biggest. This was 15.09 acres in combination, and you could see we could get buildings on there, but we'd have a lot of varying sites to acquire and or negotiate with landowners with a lot of various building demolition to take place. So we looked at all of this, and then we applied a number of metrics or applied a rubric to how we would look at this. So we utilized this matrix as suggested by the project team to look at a series of categories for each site. So you see we have Mugar, Poets, Summer, the MIRAC property, and the high school itself. And then we have the listing of the amounts of acreage in each one. So we looked at whether or not the parcel was entirely town-owned or not, and you can see that of every one we've talked about, there are aspects of the parcel or set of parcels that are not town-owned except for the high school. We then looked at whether or not there would be topography challenges, and you can see at the rink, the MIRAC property, and the existing site, there are significant topography challenges as the land drops down towards Mill Brook on those three sites. We then looked at wetlands challenges with the river, and you can see, wetlands are I guess it would be the brook, and probably could make an argument that we could have even filled in Summer Street and the rink there as the brook really runs near that, as well as the MIRAC site. We know the Mugar site has those concerns, as well as the high school with the brook. The next category was whether or not it was already zoned for open space, and that was certainly the case at Poets Corner and the Summer Street and the rink property. We looked at whether or not it had any protection in terms of being dedicated park space, and the fields on Summer Street do have that protection. We looked at location in terms of being centrally located as a matter of equity for people around town, and you can see that Mugar and Poets are certainly not central in town. The high school itself is probably the most central of all of the options, though Summer Street and MIRAC are also quite central. We then looked at traffic and congestion concerns. Definitely would be concerns at Mugar in that regard, also concerns at Poets Corner and Summer Street as well. Probably less concerns based on proximity to Mass Ave at MIRAC. And though there are actually concerns at Arlington High School, it currently exists as a high school, so it wouldn't be adding or creating any new traffic or congestion. We looked at loss of revenue, loss of services provided to town residents, not from the town, but from private business or recent town investments. Mugar property, completely privately owned, one way or another, a loss of property tax revenue. And MIRAC property, certainly a significant loss of property tax revenue, but also a good deal of services that people in Arlington use. There's a lot of automotive repair, sales, work bar, funeral home, sort of go down the list of services that are available to Arlington residents there. And access to MBTA, Mugar, very poor access. The rest have access to the MBTA, though MIRAC and the Arlington High School have the best access to the majority of the bus routes in town on Mass Ave. And then finally, site contamination to be considered. We know the high school site has contamination issues that I believe Lori will speak about a little bit tonight. And MIRAC some of the properties in that MIRAC suite have contamination issues. So that's sort of the suite of considerations we looked at. And when you look at the sum, even though the high school site currently does have challenges, it still has fewer challenges than the other sites that we looked at. So after that analysis, the committee voted to support remaining on the existing site. We'll submit this analysis to the MSBA as we go forward. And I guess at some point tonight, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.
So hello, I'm Matthew Jenger. I'm the principal of the high school. My job is just to talk a little bit about the educational program and then how that's reflected in the designs that you're going to be seeing next. About 5 years ago, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of folks in the town, this process really began with an audit of the high school to look at the state of affairs, and we found that to fix everything in the high school that was broken or past its usable life was over $40 million. And that's in a building that at the time was about 1,250 students. We're now up to 1,350 students, and we're on track to get up to about 1,750 or a little bit more than that in the next few years. And so even had we fixed that, we would have a building that was substandard and didn't support our educational programming. So knowing that this was on the way, we in the high school really 4 years ago began reflecting on what it was we wanted for each of our programs in the departments and in other functions throughout the school. And folks started going out and looking at other schools and other programs. So by the time this project started, where we'd been approved by the MSBA, we already had done a lot of thinking, had a lot of reports, and a lot of reflection going on. And that's important because over the last few months, we've been building what's called the educational program. And the purpose of the educational program is to say what it is we need to do in the school and what it is we need the building to have in it in order to be able to do that, because that's got to drive the programming. And that's what drives the design that's going to get shared with you soon. And that process, just to be clear, we had community forums like this. We've had a few of them already. We had interviews over a number of days with all of the staff where they talked about the work they'd done. We had 3 rounds of the visioning groups, which were about 60 folks from the school and the community who came together to really talk about all the various different pieces of what we wanted that building to be able to do, and came up with guiding principles. And then over that period of time, we wrote the educational program, which is now over 60 pages. It's brilliant, I know, because I was intimately involved with writing it. So just to get a sense of what we have in the building right now in the building we have about 47 classrooms, 12 science labs, 4 art rooms, and a number of other facilities. Of those 47 classrooms, only 23% of them meet the requirements and expectations, the standards for a classroom size. So most of them are too small. In addition, 23 of those 47 have obstructed views. So there's like a post in the middle of that space that's already too small. In terms of science classrooms, we don't have enough of them, and only one of those meets the size requirements that are expected for schools. The art classrooms actually are pretty nice. We'll talk about those going forward. They're a little smaller than we'd like them to be, but we have good facilities in that area. So as we've gone through the same situation, we have an auditorium. Right now it's 900 seats. But it's 900 seats in a space that actually by code and standard would seat 550 people. It's 900 seats with a proscenium that's 12 feet high, with lights that don't hit the front of the stage, with no wing on one side, with no green rooms in the back. There's a lot of sort of facilities issues. So what we did in terms of trying to figure out what we needed was we went through and matched with what the MSBA will reimburse and what the guidelines are for the program and what the recommendations are for standards, each of our program spaces with what you would actually get if you had the right number, which is right now planning for 1,755 students. We have 1,350 now. And also adequate facilities, so the right size and the right equipments, and then appropriate adjacencies. So for an example of an adjacency, right now, our makerspace where we make our scenes, that's the wood shop where we make our scenes and stuff, that's down a flight of staircases around the corner and underneath the building. So anything that we use on the set that's built down there has to be carried up and around the building and fit through a normal sized door. Our band room is up a stairwell and around the corner from that, so when the students are coming down there for a concert, they're carrying down through stairwells and outdoors all of the equipment they need. And the little theater where they practice and use as a green room is down and around the corner. And if any of you have been to the auditorium, I put it upon anyone to find the bathroom. So we don't have things where it is they're supposed to be or enough of them. That's what we're looking for in sort of what it is we're doing. So the big overview in terms of guiding principles, as we went through, the sort of vision that drove in every single section was this idea of a central learning commons. So a learning commons is like a library, but it's more than a library because it's a library that's not like the library I grew up in where they shushed you all the time. If you go into the Arlington High School library, it is a busy, active place full of classes and students working collaboratively. So a learning commons is a library, a place where you get your research tools and your study tools and your collaboration tools, and where groups can come together and do interdisciplinary work, where students can work independently and collaboratively on all the kinds of more extended project-based learning that we're moving towards as we go forward. So at the middle of the school, you really want this learning commons, all of these multi-use and interdisciplinary spaces. Every single department said they wanted to be next to the library. which is not actually physically and possible, but we've done our best to make it so everybody's close in appropriate ways. And then in Arlington, we have a very strong departmental system, and we really want to support those departments in terms of their structure, but making it easy for them to collaborate with one another, and also to build more opportunities for hands-on learning. If your classroom is too small, if your hallways are cramped, you can't really have students break out and have collaborative conversations because they're all on top of each other, and you can't make or do big things that are project-based because you don't have any place to put them. So we're trying to design a space around that kind of use. So when you look at the adjacency diagram, where was that little thing you had? So when you look at the adjacency diagram, now this is a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional space. So I always warn everybody, if history is way over there, it really doesn't mean that it's way far away from science, because all that's going to be on top of everything and they can all be closer. But we're looking at sort of major clusters of what things we want close to what things. And so the big picture was this idea in the center of this learning commons. So an area where the library, the cafeteria are close and can be used collaboratively as breakout spaces and study spaces, where you have easy access for other organizations to the athletic facilities, because those are large gathering spaces, in the auditorium. And then around those spaces, you have all kinds of different support spaces. And so the vision there is, when you think about students out here in the academic wings, they don't have to be far away, but students are in the academic wings. Those are quiet spaces where students are focusing on their academic work. Very often in school, we go someplace, right? We send them to get extra help. We send them to the library. We go down to work in a computer lab or other sorts of things. You want those spaces to all be here. So then the idea is students are all coming into the middle, and this space is really going to be a very active, lively space with quiet spaces, noisy spaces, but lots and lots of supervision and interaction. One of the guiding principles was to sort of passively have sort of passive surveillance or clarity, which is to say, it's really easy to supervise students under that sort of situation without feeling like they're being supervised. You don't have to ask them where they're going. They're always going here. And you don't have to ask them where they're going. They're not going there, because this is not a place where you're going unless you're in classes and are doing your programming. So then the other major clusters in here are these. So there's the Performing Arts Suite, the STEAM Suite is a larger group, and then the other cluster, which is the humanities. Now, these folks want to be close to each other, and our expectation is that they will be in a building that flows properly. Right now, again, one of the funny things about our building is everything is far from everything. It just doesn't matter where you go. So everything will be closer to everything than the current building, and it's a matter of what's adjacent to what. So big spaces in terms of what we're talking about. So in the new building, we're envisioning having roughly 60 classrooms, regular old classrooms. Those 60 classrooms are going to be mainly used by history, ELA, world languages, and math, because those are folks who just use regular classrooms. There'll be some other folks that do as well. In each of those clusters, we talked about having teacher prep spaces, departmental offices where teachers can work together and collaborate. In each of the spaces, you'll see these purple dots. Those are vocational or breakout spaces where there's sort of specialized technology that supports each of those departments in doing more interdisciplinary work. So you'll see here in the visual arts, we have a digital arts lab. We currently have one of those, but it's crammed in with our CAD lab. Here by the performing arts, we have a digital production lab. So that's, right now we have a digital music lab, and they have a little teeny production studio. The idea is to have a production studio that actually allows a group of students to go in there and do recording, and also would be wired into our theater spaces so larger productions could be filmed and put in there and students could do production. We have the STEM lab. Again, right now that's in a repurposed classroom. It's not a deliberate intended STEM lab. So wonderful things happen in all of these spaces, but what we're trying to do is give people what it is they need. Over here on this side, history and ELA are often doing large breakout or debates or discourses. They're bringing in groups. So the idea then is to have what we're calling the discourse lab, which isn't a lecture hall so much as a discussion hall, right? It's a hall where people can have departments, but it's set up to really allow people to have debates and conversations and other kinds of work like that. And then the language lab, we've all remember what a language lab used to be. You know, it was you in a little booth and you'd listen and you'd talk. But really now we're talking about a language immersion lab. We're already experimenting with virtual reality in some of the classes. Yes, we really are. It's really cool. And one of the really neat ideas that the language department had was they talked about technology. There's virtual reality, there's Skype, the ability to talk to classes in other places. But there's also just straight up cultural work. So they actually wanted a kitchen in there because just being able to actually experience the food and other activities. When I told them we were getting them a really good language lab, they were kind of excited. When I told them we'd have a kitchen in there, they all jumped up and down. And so I think it really, it is really good to think about kind of how those things work. So science classrooms, we are requesting 17. And the reason why we were requesting 17 is because it's 1,750 kids, and we have students using them at about rate of about 110%, which is to say almost everybody takes 4 years of science, and about 10% of people take double up, so they're taking actually more than one science class. So in order to have enough labs, in order to be able to support everybody, we need 17 labs. Right now, art, we're asking for 4 art rooms. Their code, their sort of table of what it is they would give you, gives you 3. But we already have 4. And we only have 1,250 kids. So it's pretty clear that and they're full. Like, I mean, right now, by the way, if you haven't gone to the art gallery, we have right now off the cafeteria, the art display. Every year it's the best ever. This is the best ever. It's really amazing stuff. So they're using all of those spaces. In fact, the art department has taken over the teacher's cafe, and they've also sort of moved off to take over spaces in the CAD lab. So we really need those 4. We're hiring a 4th art teacher this year just to fill the demand we have. So we know we'll need them when we get there. What was my next piece? So performing arts. So right now, if you look over here at the performing arts, by the way, the size of these bubbles is just square feet. We're not actually making all of the spaces round. And when she shows her sketches, they'll also just be square feet. They'll just be rectangular square feet. So again, it's not going to have all of the exact spaces. These are just sketches to figure out kind of how big things would be and where they would be. So right now in the performing arts, we have a 900 square foot theater, but we, with a short proscenium and bad lights and all those sorts of things. If we replace that, MSBA sort of starts by recommending a 750-seat auditorium. But we don't see a 750-seat auditorium being able to seat half of our school. We don't see it being able to seat what we would expect to come. I mean, I think most of you, particularly, frankly, middle school parents, have come and seen that we're already having 2 presentations just to have many of the larger concerts. We think, having gone around and around and around, that keeping our 900-seat auditorium will be workable because that auditorium is going to be significantly actually larger in square footage in order to be able to accommodate the space. So it will have the same number of seats, but aisles that are wider, seats that are bigger, aprons and spaces that we can break out into. We're asking to keep the same size stage that we have, which is a little bigger than what the MSBA recommends. That's a 2,100 square foot stage. Again, if you've seen the end of the concert where the band and the chorus and the orchestra are all there playing Thus Spake Zarathustra or the 1812 Overture or something. We barely fit as it is. Now with larger space, we expect to do that, and one of the things the architects recommended was adding on these potential extensions so you can really fit everybody in there. We will get what we don't have: green rooms in the back, wings in the back, a fly space, things that a really first-class theater in a high school is expected to have. Those are standard. If you go around the state right now and you look at the high schools and the programs in performing arts, that's what everybody has. I mean, in order for the students to be able to do the kind of tech that they want to do and really perform at that high level, they need not to be running into a wall when they go off the side of the stage. Band room and theater room, we're looking at, again, our band and theater. Our band already is bigger than what they envision. They talk about a band being 50 to 100 students. At its largest, our symphony orchestra, I think, is 120 students right now. And if we're getting 30% larger, I don't see the kids dropping out. So I think we're going to have a much bigger space. So the current recommendation is about 2,500 square feet for each of those. Right now, if you be in our band room, it's about 1,500 square feet, and it's very crowded. You're tripping over everything. There's not good storage. In addition, we have our drama program, our theater program, and Mr. Byrne right now teaches what we call the Little Theater. The Little Theater is a long classroom with a step, which gives you a little proscenium where they can call it a stage. So the norm now would be to create what, to make that theater classroom what's called a black box. So we're requesting a 3,000 square foot black box. And so the idea of a black box is it's a large space, high ceiling with ductwork so you can put lights and other things in there and really flexibly move around furniture. So sometimes they can be practicing in all 2,000 square or 3,000 square feet of it. They can be using that for dance. Sometimes they're bringing out seats and using 2,000 square feet of it for a production. Sometimes they want to do theater in the round, so they put the seats all around, depending on what they do. And that's really going to be a wonderful facility for sort of more flexibly doing our small productions, our one acts, and other things we do during the year. So vocational programs, so these purple spaces, for the language we have, they call them vocational programs. We don't really think of them as vocational programs. We think of them as hands-on learning centers. But those are all these little purple spaces that I talked about before. Right now, again, we repurpose all these different spaces. So we had the old wood shop, which was not being particularly heavily used about 4 years ago. Dr. Bodie let us reopen it up as the maker space. And now we teach some wood shop classes down there, but more importantly, we have the art department going there to do sculpture and design. We've got these giant heads that they're making in spaces down there. We have the physics department going down there to make trebuchets and bridges. We have social studies departments going in there to use our laser cutter, which we got from AAF. Always got to shout out to AAF. Which allows students to actually scan their own faces and put them on things in order to make identities. Right now, the group of students in the sculpture classes have scanned their heads and are printing out on 3D printers busts of themselves that they're then incorporating into identity sculptures. So those spaces allow students to do so many really exciting things. And one of the things that's like really hugely important to understand about technology, just generally, technology does sort of 4 things in schools. And first, it just supplements things we already did. You word process way better. But much more interesting, it lets teachers differentiate. It lets kids create professional quality work. And it lets them engage with actually doing and sharing real work out in the world. And that's really important because the last thing it does is transform the entire universe that we're going into. Right? So if students don't have expertise and knowledge and skill navigating that, they're really at a disadvantage. How many minutes am I at? I'm good. So vocational, performing arts, physical education. So one of the things I love actually about Arlington is that Arlington loves all parts of the school, right? All children and the whole school. So our physical education facilities, Arlington's physical education facilities in some ways have some advantages. Our gym, the big red gym, the Taz gym, is too small. You run into the wall. When you come off the basketball court, it doesn't seat the whole school. It's not a good acoustic space, so they can't break it up and use it for more than one class at a time because you can't hear in there if there's 2 classes. But it's still a nice size, full-size gym. We have the blue gym, which is about 7,000 square feet. It's old, it's got leaky windows, it's really hard to get things in and out of. But again, it allows us to run gymnastics and other activities in there. And then we have the pit, which is over 100 years old with the original floor underneath the original building. But it's kind of a cool space for the wrestling room, and it's a nice breakout space. Those 3 spaces plus the physical fitness room, which is the big training room, get a ton of use. Again, Arlington has students using those spaces far more than many other schools. We'll have 4 activities going on most of the time. So when the MSB does not envision schools with 3 gyms. And as we're looking at the spaces we're having, we're trying to create a space where we have multiple spaces for students to do things. So within that big oval, we have requested 16,000 square foot gyms. So that's 4,000 square feet bigger than our current gym. And the idea is that you then take the sort of the normal basketball court footprint and you run around that a track that's 1/12 of a mile long. So that track, it's a jog. We don't call it a running track because if you ran really fast, it's short. It doesn't have banked sides. Technically, a running track is banked. But it is a jogging track. You can run a JV meet on it. Students can train on it. They can run and sort of get their miles. When you talk to our running coaches, and we have some very good runners this time, they say, to be honest, you're not going to put your miles on inside. We're going to go outside and run the miles. But inside, in terms of doing sort of cold weather training, keeping people going, it's a lot better than what you used to do, which was run through the halls, which was bad for everybody's legs. So that's the space that you put in the inside. That space is then big enough for us to divide it in half and to be acoustically set up so that it's not so echoey that you can't run. So the idea is you can run 2 spaces in there because there's 2 basketball courts side by side. You can have students running around the track. The fitness room probably will make a little smaller because square feet cost money, but we'll make it built to suit so that it will have more effectively use the space we have. And then to replace the blue gym, we are asking for, they talk about a 3,000 square foot alt PE space, but given what it is we have and the uses we put it to, currently we're asking for a 7,000 square foot alt or PE space. So that would replace the blue gym. The pit, to be honest, during the day, it's a great space, but we can use those other spaces if they're set up correctly to do the other things that we're doing. So we're hoping to keep the pit. We're hoping to keep that square footage. What's my time? I'm done? Oh, then I'll just wrap up. That's easy, because I was pretty much done. So those are the things that it is we're hoping to do. But we are also, one of the things to talk about is just the last piece, is that we've also then talked about all the specialized special education spaces and building all of those spaces out to really suit the programs that we have in there. And that's these various pink spaces. And one of the spaces that includes, which uses a lot of the space in the pit, is to do PE, adapted PE classes. So those are PE for special education. And so that space would be built into the building. I think I covered everything. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now that you've heard about the educational needs, I'm going to talk a little bit about the spatial needs of the existing building. Briefly, if you've been to the previous one of these sessions, we've talked a lot about it, but our task was to understand what the existing building is about, what its condition is, what the sizes of spaces are, understand how it's used. We've been doing that. We've developed drawings. We've written long narrative reports about the existing conditions. All of that helps us to understand how can it be used in the future. So one of the things, and Matthew touched upon this, is we developed diagrams, number one, showing what's there and how they're used. But if hopefully you can see this, we've hatched with sort of a separate hatch all the spaces in the building that do not meet current guidelines. Okay? So this is important because if you're going to renovate a building, MSBA, who's helping you fund that project, they're expecting that you're going to bring all your spaces up to, at minimum, their guidelines. So we went through all the floor plans, and you're seeing the building, the lowest level, the second level. I know, just to confuse people, the 3rd floor is what you walk in on when you come in the front of the building. So the 3rd floor is here. So everything that looks a little, I mean, I don't know what you're seeing back there, but it's all supposed to be light yellow. This is all undersized spaces. All of these classrooms at Downs are undersized spaces. Similarly, this is the science, all the science spaces. Again, Matthew mentioned only one meets MSBA guidelines. That's this one here. Again, the back part of the building, which is referred to as Downs, just about all of those spaces do not meet MSBA guidelines. So MSBA tasks us, at minimum, to look at renovation only, look at renovations and additions to the building, and to look at new construction. Okay, so we have done that, and when we look at renovation only for this project, we do not fit the entire educational program in the existing building. And sometimes that kind of confuses people because it's a big building, so it should be able to fit a lot. But this building is made up of a lot of corridors, a lot of stairwells. I think we counted well over 5,000 linear feet of corridors, 20 stairwells. That takes up a lot of square footage, but it's not usable for educational use. The other major factor about this building that I know you all know is that 2 floors are underground. So all of that physical space that's underground, you can't put classrooms there. You can't put science classrooms there. You can't put spaces that need windows and ventilation and views and natural light. So whole sections of this 400,000 square foot complex are really not suited for educational use. So we still did as we were tasked to do, and the next diagrams here is we went through the entire building based on the program developed that Matthew was just talking about, and we determined how to fit those spaces in. We started with the core academic classrooms, the sciences, and so on, and went and used the whole building. So we kicked out anybody and everybody that wasn't straightforward academic spaces. And we still cannot fit the educational program, the straight educational program. With the layouts we have here, so again, first floor, second floor, we use the third floor, the fourth floor, the fifth floor, and the sixth floor, so that this would be removing the district admin. We are not fitting the preschool program at all. We are not fitting most of the special education programs. So, and the other really important thing to note is this is not ideal to have science rooms basically spread out between the third floor, the second floor, and the first floor of the building. You're not creating any sort of grouping of spaces that make a lot of sense. This is purely an act of trying to fit it in the building. So, after we did all of this sort of legwork and went back to the building committee, it was our recommendation, and it is possible to do this, to report out to the state funding agent that says, hey, listen, we looked at straightforward renovation. It does not work. We don't want to keep looking at it. We don't want to waste everyone's time. We'd rather be looking at options that we think are really, legitimate options to be looking at. So the decision has been made by the building committee that we will not be pursuing renovation only. It just does not work. So that leads us into other options, looking at ways to add on and renovate the building. I might go back to the other slides, although you probably can't see them as clearly as I'd like, but when we were looking at that and we were looking at these spaces, and in particular, what are the challenges about the existing footprint of this building, and one of those challenges is how spread out it is. The north courtyard, even though it's lovely on a nice day if you happen to be out there, really makes teaching and learning very difficult. The kids all but need to run sometimes to make it from one class to the next because of all of that circulation around these courtyards and all of these different levels and how spread out it is. So one of the challenges that we realize about this site is that it doesn't work the way it's laid out. It's too spread out. It's hard to manage. It's hard to maintain. It's energy inefficient. I mean, everything about it is not successful. So our goal would be to provide a more efficient building footprint that's easier to manage, easier to maintain, and better for teaching and learning. That being said, on top of the fact that we identified Downs, and again, if you're not familiar with all the name calling, Downs is the back part of this building next to the red gym. So Downs, we identified basically that just about every space does not meet requirement. It's a relatively low floor-to-floor, which makes it difficult to upgrade with new mechanical systems. And on top of that, it's a concrete structured waffle slab, which if you've been in the space, you've seen it. It's that coffered-looking ceiling. That's, again, very challenging to, retrofit and change into something else. So that led us to keep looking at all these other spaces. And if we think about this wing here, which is technically column house, but it's not what people think of as columns house, because it's the back part. It's like a T at the back part of what is the pitched roof with the clock tower. If we look at that, and that has your sciences and your arts, all of which are undersized. So what we're talking about is you have to knock down 2 spaces to make 1 successful space. So again, we would be gutting out all of those spaces to make them work. And again, we're talking about a building that is a structured waffle slab. So the more we kept thinking about these spaces and their locations and what they're made of and their configurations, it became very clear to us that they will not meet the needs as we go forward. And it doesn't make sense to try to keep them there and jerry-rig the right solution around spaces that are not successful spaces. So you also heard Matthew say that the gymnasium is undersized. So another reason, not only because of it being to the back of the site and a hike to get to for the kids, it's also not the right size. So you will see, as we're looking at renovation addition options, that our recommendations are to only consider renovating Fusco House. And if you're not familiar, Fusco is the oldest original building, which makes up the left-hand side as you're facing the building on Mass Ave, and or column house, which is that central portion with the columns in the front, the pitched roof, and the clock tower. I didn't say the last piece. The last piece is Lowe's Auditorium, but again, I think Matthew covered how inefficient, and we're not able to expand that to the size that it needs to be to meet the school program. So, that being said, we do have a handout for you just to be able to mark up as you go along. We're going to go through 8 options. You're going to start thinking, oh my God, which one's this, which one's that, what does it mean? So they're just a quick little diagrams that you can sort of either make notes for yourself or whatnot about what we're going to be showing here. Okay, so I'm going to say something, I'm going to say it twice because I want everyone to hear it. These are preliminary concepts. They're not designs, they're not final, there's nothing about them that's final. They're concepts, which in my mind are ideas of how we might approach this, okay? So keep the word concepts in your mind, and it really is just looking at it from an approach point of view. How could we achieve the educational program in the space we have, creating the adjacencies that Matthew was discussing with you all? How can we do that? That's what this is. Nothing is in stone. They're just ideas. There's going to be a lot of development over the coming months, let alone over a year and a half of time. So do not get hung up on any one thing, although we'd love to hear your ideas. So what we're presenting here are 4 concepts that are renovation addition, another 4 concepts that are essentially new construction with the possibility in any one of them to incorporate historic elements. And what do I mean by that? We've done this on a lot of our projects. Beautiful old buildings have columns and pediments and pieces that are really lovely, and they're nice to be able to reincorporate in the building. So I will just sort of say overall, you're going to see things coming and going. There's a lot of ideas here. It could end up being a little bit of mix and matching. That was if that's the best way to say it. So if you see that there's a concept that everyone really likes, but they actually really want to talk about having more parking on the site, which we'll talk about, then that's possible. So even though some are shown with what we're calling structured parking, it's basically using that lowest level that's below grade anyway. All could have that. So it's not a deciding factor at this point. It's just an option. We're just throwing out different ideas. But one thing to be very clear, all of them will meet the educational space needs. All of them will be provided with what I'm calling distinct entrances. And let's just give 2 minutes on what that means. This isn't just a high school, in case anyone's wondering. You think you're just doing a high school, but we're not just doing a high school. We have a preschool program, and they need a separate entrance from where all the high schools are coming and going. We also have the lab program, if you're not familiar with LABBB, which is the Lexington, Arlington, I won't get them in order, Burlington, Bedford, and Belmont, I'm sure that the B's aren't in the right order, program, which, again, Arlington was one of the founding communities of, and we host a specific program at the high school. We have that program, and again, they shift their hours a little bit, and they come in a little bit later, and they leave a little bit later. But again, it's a special population that can't be in the throes and the mix of everyone else all the time. We also, if nothing else comes up for another site, which at this point we have not identified anything, we also have the district offices. School district offices, and we have a number of other things that are coming and going in this property. So it's really ideal, in my mind, to try to create entrances that are distinct for those programs and that save the school department from having random other adults wandering through the building at different times. They're only in separate sections. It's It's just a very important aspect, I think, of the whole site. And in general, we talked a little bit about parking, but in general, the site circulation is pretty lousy. If you've ever tried to get around and you're not sure if you're on the one way, if you're going the wrong way, if you should be there at all. So better circulation overall, better parking, and better site use. I mean, the idea of having outdoor classrooms or having an amphitheater, things like that, yes, the students do go out to the front lawn, but there's nothing programmed there for them right now. So trying to think about that. So the first alternative, we're calling alternative 1, retains and renovates both Fusco and Column House. I think they're pretty distinct in these images here. And it's a relatively compact floor plan, which means that we get some more site use when the building floor plan is pretty compact. We sort of term this one as expand Fusco. And so we're literally building out to the backside of Fusco, matching it floor to floor, and really creating a great classroom wings. In this case, we're thinking of the humanities department being there. Numbers mean a little bit less now, but it does have a lot of parking. It's the potential of 225, and this one does have parking underneath the building, which could be another 80 spaces. The distinct entrance, we have been able to create it so that all what I identify as community spaces, which really in truth, this building will be used almost throughout by the community, between community ed and all the other activities. But if you think about those 3 large core spaces, the gymnasium, the auditorium, and the cafeteria, in a lot of these diagrams, they're all contiguous on the same floor, which makes it nice to get to. In some, they're just on 2 floors from each other, and you have the gymnasium with the upper auditorium and the cafeteria with the base auditorium, things like that. So all of that's being worked out, but the general goals are there for most of these ideas that we're showing here. Again, don't get too hung up on the renderings. They're just cute, just concepts, an idea that sort of gives a scale. We're not talking about windows and we're not talking about materials and anything like that, but just sort of massing and thinking about how it would be. Various things like green roofs. I'm sure you've heard that term a lot these days, but green roofs that actually could be used by the science department would be fabulous. And so we have a second, whoops, I skipped. A second alternative. Now this too keeps Fusco and Column House, just a little bit different layout. And one of the things that we sort of think about with this one is we're creating sort of an organizing principle around a main street or a central corridor where everything comes off of that corridor, and one way of sort of organizing the whole building. That's the concept that we're seeing here. You're sort of seeing, when you see something like this, literally the auditorium is using those lower levels because it doesn't have to have windows. And then maybe the idea that you actually use that upper part of that as the green roof or the amphitheater, or play movies off the backdrop of the fly loft that's coming up out of the ground. You're just thinking about ideas of how you might use the spaces. And that's what you're seeing here along the front of the building. This one doesn't happen to have parking at the lower level, so it has less parking spaces. And then, what else do we want to say? So one thing I should also point out, in all the options that you're seeing Column House, this concept of being able to open up, let's just say to the rafters, and when I tell you it's really high, it's really high. So we'll have to think about exactly how that works, but really taking advantage of all that volume that's underneath that pitched roof is one idea that we've been looking at. And we sort of continually come back to that's where the library wants to be. That's where the library learning common wants to be, central to everything in the building and really taking advantage of what would probably be a really fabulous space. So that's a point, and again, you'll see that in each one. Alternative number 4 is focused more of just keeping Column House and replacing everything else. And what sort of seems to happen in a lot of these, and again, it's because of the grade change from front to back. You have a lot of your big core spaces that are in a bar together, and then the academic classroom wings, and also what we also call the STEAM wing. I'm sure you're all familiar, science, technology. engineering, art, and math all together. So thinking about creating wings of academic spaces. In this case, we sort of think of it as radiating after a central core. So at the lower level of the cafeteria, everything sort of comes off the cafeteria, and at the upper level, it's that central library. So it's sort of creating two commons, if you would, one with a little more academic bent and one more of a social bent. And again, happens to have 186 parking spaces. It just doesn't happen to have the space parking underneath. And you can see in these diagrams, there's arrows pointing to how we're thinking about entering this building. The other thing that we want to take advantage of, if you think that, okay, we're going to improve circulation around this building and we're going to engage the whole, all sides of this building, the concept of creating, I'll refer to it as two main entrances, but two distinct ways from front and back that if you entered, you easily could get to those shared core spaces. And so this sort of opens the site up a little bit more for different types of circulation, both pedestrian and bicycle and car parking, and having it happen sort of from both sides. Certainly a hope would be that with some level of increased parking, we will lessen the impact on the neighborhood and the streets where a lot of parking happens, certainly when there's events and even on a given school day. Let's see. So now we switch to what I'm sort of feel is essentially all new, and then it's the keeping of and the rehab of Column House and its placement. So this kind of stuff actually gets us really excited. When you think about it, the columns are very special. They're very distinct. They're about 18 feet high. They do need to be rehabbed, of course, but we all sort of see them as this iconic face at the front of the building. But what's interesting to us is thinking about when you come into the building and maybe you're in the lobby or you're heading into the library, that those columns are there. So a way of sort of have them become an interior threshold that is seen and connected and people interact with throughout the school day. Again, that's just an idea or another possibility. So what else you're seeing here is the concept of building on the front green. Now, it's a really large front green. It's very special in that it's the only one of its size throughout Arlington for the length of Mass Ave. But I would argue it's pretty underutilized. It is an open space, and sometimes teachers pop out and do things, but it needs to be rehabbed and refurbished just like the building, and reprogrammed and have a lot of purpose to it because it's a lot of square footage and acreage, I should say. So the concept here in general, Matthew said it best. We're not building circles, and we're also not just building boxes. So don't get into what shape it is or anything like that. But the concept here is to frame a front entrance, so that you're sort of taking ownership of that entire block from Mass Ave, so that you know that you are at the school from edge to edge. Right now, the way it's laid out, you sort of bleed a little over into the CVS parking lot and a little bit over here where some buildings are. And so the idea of giving it a greater prominence and a sort of a front that's sort of very clearly the entrance to the school, and providing, there's a possibility that there's some level of drop-off still at the front, or maybe it becomes a pedestrian front. And again, the cars are around the back. The other real plus to this that cannot be minimized is the concept that when you have the front green to build on and you build something new, you have just created that swing space for your students. So now your students go into a nice new space, and then we keep working on the back side of the building. So that is one thing that is very important to think about. Again, it was discussed briefly by Jeff at the beginning tonight, is how we phase this and how we construct it and how we build it. And in general, if we can't build something new to put them in as a swing space, then we have to temporarily build swing space. So the idea of the modular classrooms. And the argument to think about with that is money you don't ever get back. You spend the money on that, it's temporary, it serves its purpose, and it's needed. So if that is the choice, then that's what it's used for. But something like this, you're putting it into brick and mortars right from the beginning. It's something you have forever afterwards. So again, it's a thing to weigh and think about with these concepts. So again, the idea of having, STEAM wings and humanity wings, the performing arts, and the athletics, sort of those masses of program space is what we're working with. This one does happen to have parking underneath. It's a layout with 65 spaces. The other thing that maybe you can't follow unless you're clicking through them very quickly, although you do have them in your diagrams, is you can start to see a lot of green appearing in the back. That's used to be building. So that's the other plus. You sort of think about reprogramming the front of the site and creating a distinct entrance and creating that, initial building in the space. All is said and done, you get more space at the back of the site to be either programmed for parking or for outdoor play, practice, whatever is needed. So there's always trade-offs and pluses and minuses, and that's one of the pluses, I think. And then alternative 6 is a similar concept, except programmatically we're talking about bringing all of the academics up front. This is, in some respects, it depends on what your perception is of what the front green is. So in one scenario, it's deeper, but not as wide of what is open space. Something like this, it's shallower, but wider. So these are things that, again, the building committee will be thinking about, and we want to hear from all of you of your thoughts about these things. So again, it has distinct entrances coming into the space. It has a central core of that cafeteria/library commons that are happening. It's not shown. It could have, again, components from Column House reused, and certainly even some components from Fusco. There's some great old friezes on the building. So happens to have 176 parking spaces, just so happens. And again, it provides what will be very beneficial if we were to do it swing space at the front of the building, front of the existing building, and much more open space at the back of the site. 6A is just a slight tweak from this as we've been evolving, and I think that, as a committee, we wanted to show you that because this is what's happening. We're sort of looking at things and tweaking them and changing as we go. So 6A, what we really did was just we moved that box of program space that seemed to be jutting out into what could be more open space and moved it to the side. There's some pluses to that. Number one, the back of the site gets opened even more. And also we're able to make easier connections from that. That happens to be, in a lot of these, the other programs. So not the core academics that we're thinking of, but the district offices could be there. They don't need to be right in the middle of the school. The preschool can be there. They, again, don't want to be right in the middle of the school. So it gives you the opportunity to sort of segregate in a positive way certain aspects of the program as based on their use and where they want to be on the site. It has 238 spaces, and that's without anything underground. And again, the swing space conversation. And okay, before I click to this one, we did this because we figured there'd be at least one person in the town of Arlington that would ask the question, well, what if you put the whole thing out front? So, I'm showing you this. It's not because I'm recommending it. Okay, I just want to be clear. So, if we were to build a brand new school of over 400,000 square feet on the front green, the plus is it's one single phase construction. 20 months, it's built. Everyone moves in, done. That's the plus. It's 6 stories tall and it's on the sidewalk. So there's a lot of challenges in my mind about that. It's a very urban solution. You know, it would change what your experience is on Mass Ave. I mean, you have a lot of things going up on Mass Ave and the possibility of things going higher in the future. It would really open the back of the site. Yeah, I mean, we haven't even thought about all the possibilities of how the back portion could be programmed if everything was built up here. Again, I'm not recommending this, but I think that it's worth the conversation, again, because if someone was going to ask the question, we want to be able to respond to it and look at it. So you do have... I did? Oh, yeah. I skipped one. This is a jumpy little button. Goodness. Okay. So again, the point of fact that as we're evolving, so we did number one, and we did 1 through a bunch of numbers, and then we thought about it, and we didn't have an option that allowed the community to say, I want to keep Fusco and or Column House. But I love the idea of having some swing space first so I can get this project done faster. So that's where this version came up. So we sort of said, okay, we'll provide a new steam wing. So we got a nice new building built. All kinds of program spaces get emptied out of the existing building and are able to be up and running in the nice new building. This one, the idea behind this is a little similar to what we were talking about some of the other new construction, but you'd walk into the lobby, the interior space that's multi-story, and you have the colonnades, which would be entering the library and those spaces, and you sort of would always be experiencing that space. So in the idea here that you're creating a new forecourt, a new entry zone, you know, a really formulated open space that's programmed. And we, when we did this from 1 to 1A, we also sort of opened up a more generous entry at the back side of the building. Again, with the idea that you could enter in here at the back side and have the cafeteria right there, as opposed to coming in the front side and just going down a floor, and just being able to really use the whole building through the different entrances. And so, oh yes, so number 3. Everyone's wondering where number 3 was. I do know how to count. Number 3 is missing on purpose. We actually looked at something that the committee decided against, and it was a good concept, a good idea, which is thinking about using Fusco for other purposes, giving it back to the town for other purposes, which in theory sounds great because, you know, I'm sure there's always, you know, more spaces are needed. It really locked up the site. We really, as much as you can sit there and say we have 22 acres, we don't really have that much room in the contiguous area of where we're going to build a building. And it just made it very challenging. So we did diagrams that sort of showed you really needed to be away from that building to be able to get light into all of your new spaces, and you were really just you were taking up so much footprint to accommodate that. And then the truth of the matter is, then all of a sudden Fusco would be on the next ballot because it would need to be renovated to be used for something else. So we're just sort of, that's why 3's not here. Okay. Who's going over next? Jeff? Hey, Jeff. You're in. I think he's on close-up.
The process is for you to write down questions, and then we'll collect those questions, and Lori will answer them. So if there's... Right, Lori?
We can do the wireless mic.
We can do the wireless mic? Just...
If they want to write down questions, they can.
Yeah, okay. So if you want to ask questions, you can write them down and we'll read them off, or you can just raise your hand. Do you want... Go ahead, yeah. Yes, the mic is coming, yeah.
Which of these
options have drop-off on Mass Ave? And then related to that, do you guys have any information, like drop-off not on Mass Ave? I mean, like where the cars would come to the front of the school versus the back. And do you guys have any information about how many students arrive by car? Like, is this going to create more traffic on Mass Ave, basically?
We don't know how many students arrive by car.
I mean, the short answer is any of them could not have drop-off in front, or any of them could have drop-off in front. So it's not a given one way or another at this point. It's going to be depending on if it's a preferred to have one or the other. So in the diagrams we're doing, we're sort of showing both in different diagrams, again, just to get a feel for what people like and what they don't like. So is your preference with cars or without cars? Not this one, no. This one I think we were showing with just pedestrian. And this one, we did have drop-off. So the diagrams you're seeing here are just boxes on the existing site. And this would continue to have drop-off. Drop-off. This would have a new form of drop-off, like shown in the diagram, the little sketch on the right here. So, yeah. So at the moment, you know, even the ones if we build out front can still have drop-off. I think, you know, if we were to do that, it would purely be drop-off and maybe just the short-term parking and some accessible spaces, and that's it. So, you're saying here.
When you talk about parking, how much parking do we need right now between staff? What does the staff? How many spaces does the staff currently occupy? Do we know that? Okay. And just to go on further, on your diagrams, the parking that you're showing going in, the one to the right in the lower right-hand corner is part of the drugstore, so that's private already, unless you're going to take that.
Oh, I know. Yeah. So the number of parking spaces currently on site are we calculate 205. That's not the same answer as this is really loud. That's not the same answer as how many people need to park on the site. And so the school department's actually calculating that now and sort of breaking it out by high school versus any of the special programs versus the district, so we have a handle on the separate numbers.
I wanted to know if any quantification or programming has been done relative to the need for the outdoor space, because that actually, to me, would lead you down a path of how much space you might want behind the school, because, you know, additional rec fields, all of those things that students need. And so I know we were sort of, in your presentation, sort of dismissive about the last option, but honestly, that preserves the most amount of space for student recreation and athletics, and all of that space could be used for other things. So I think, you know, it would be really helpful to start to understand what some of the other programmatic requirements are for the whole site, rather than just the building itself, because that might lead us into one direction relative to the options and how much we build closer towards Mass Avenue.
I don't know if that was a question, but agreed, yeah.
Matt,
The question was, have you done any work to quantify or
So,
understand what recreation and athletic needs are?
no, and sorry. I'll tell you why. Until we start doing these diagrams, we really didn't know how much space we would have in the back. So we haven't been opening that door and saying, hey, what do you want? Because I'm sure they're going to come up with things. So right now, it's been programming for the outdoor school uses, not the athletic uses. So I'm trying to separate them out for the moment. But certainly, if you see a big advantage and all of a sudden you've got all the space, we're going to start talking about another practice field or another something else. So that will come next. I mean, it really is about driving the program and the different variables of how the building could work. And then an outcome of that is going to be, then how does the site impact? You know, what are the positives of the new way of laying out site? That makes sense.
Yeah, I just think
Yep.
The principal talked about the value of physical education, athletics, recreation. So I don't think of it as an afterthought. I think of it as part of the whole picture. And so I think it would behoove us to bring that conversation into the evaluation of these options.
And it will. And it will. Absolutely.
Can I just say one thing? I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and I think looking at the usage of the whole site is going to be important. But there are a lot of uses to the site, right? So we talk about, for example, an outdoor amphitheater as a space where people go, a green roof, the courtyard spaces that we have right now, the Enviro Garden, which allows students to do, sort of gardening and grow things, the front space. So there is a lot of conversation actually in the program about athletic spaces and green spaces. So I think, we could, as part of that conversation, you could put a playing field on the front field right now. It would be a practice field if we took down all the trees and matted it out and put fences so balls didn't run out into the field. Lots of schools have fields in front of them. So I think as we go forward, that whole look at space would be one. I mean, we've actually had conversations, for example, about, I don't think it's realistic engineering-wise, but de-channelizing the wetland behind so that you could use that as a natural space that has a lot of benefits also for students in terms of science and relaxation and other things. So there's a lot of uses to this space that I think have to be considered.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm just following up on that previous comment. Where are the parking spaces that you're counting? That's one kind of follow-up. And I also agree that the whole site, I think you can do as a diagram as well, because what we're seeing in green may or may not be green when you're done with figuring out where all the parking, where all those cars go, as well as what is the character of those outdoor spaces. Are they athletic, or are they more, say, ornamental or something along those lines? So I think it would be great to see the site done up as a diagram as well.
Yeah. And we do have that. We just only had so much time here tonight, so.
Most or all of these scenarios, do you need to do without a gym and an auditorium for a year at a time, or thereabouts?
Possibly. Most likely the auditorium, yes. The gym, it just depends on which layouts we're looking at. I don't think the school could go without a gym. So it may not be that all of them stay, because you have the blue and the red, and so it may be that one of them is not there and the other one's still up and running before something new is replaced. We've talked quite a bit about the auditorium. It's pretty snug right there where you want to be building one way or another, so it's hard to find a swing space for an auditorium. We also talked about possibly temporarily using the blue gym as an auditorium. So there's a number of scenarios that are possible, but first and foremost, the school has to be up and running throughout.
So all the focus on big space from MSBA sounds to me like it's more appropriate to suburban sprawl than a streetcar suburb like Arlington. It's big, big, big. What do the other streetcar suburbs do with their high school? Malden, Medford, Cambridge, Somerville, Brookline, Quincy, all those kind of places that are more like us than, Acton, say. Arlington doesn't need or want suburban sprawl. We have nowhere to put it. I'd say keep the old buildings and build higher up rather than everything be big, big, big. We don't need it.
Laura, do you want to? So one part of the question was, what do other districts do that are more urban, like Malden, Medford, and Malden, you mentioned Malden, Somerville,
Well,
Quincy, places like that.
yeah.
Based on
Well-
Brookline, which you
Well, we already are a 6-story building, so it's pretty high up, I would consider. No? I mean, everything you're seeing, all the options have 6-story wings. That's a very tall solution. I don't know what else we can, unless we're really going to go high-rise.
With all the options, architecturally, spatially, pieces that could be preserved of history, how far off are we from getting to the point where we can put price tags on the 8 different diagrams, or at least how far off are we from being able to say of the 8, this one is the most expensive to bring about, and that one is the least expensive to bring about?
So at the beginning of the meeting, we talked about that a little bit. The ranges are between 287 million and 311 million based on just square footage at this point.
Yeah.
And which one is which? I don't know, Jim, do you remember?
Well, I think the least expensive was on all new in front.
The least expensive was putting it in the front. New building in the front. Yeah, but I mean,
It's basically a 48%.
Yeah, as Jeff said, it's all square foot numbers right now, so it's very preliminary to compare. And so there's basically a 4 to 8% swing between the most expensive option and the least expensive option. So that's, you know, in the realm of, those are pretty tight numbers right now. So we couldn't say definitively at this point that one is much more expensive than another option.
but, you know, as we said earlier at the beginning of the meeting, we're very early in the process, and it's a, you know, at this point in time, it's a $300 million project.
Just to kind of continue on what this woman was mentioning, has anyone kind of studied any case studies with other communities in terms of how they've renovated an existing building? The reason why I mentioned that is because I know for a fact Brookline, when they renovated their high school, which was a long time ago, their swing space was actually a disused elementary school, and they housed the entire freshman class for 4 years. Every freshman class for 4 years used that separate building and was sectioned off, and I think it helped with a lot of the issues that they had with phasing at the high school. I'm just wondering if anyone considered that, using town-owned space separate from the actual campus.
Yeah. Our firm did Cambridge Ridge and Latins renovation, which is similar, 400,000 square feet of renovation, and they actually did just what you're suggesting. They happened to have an empty school building, and that's where their 9th grade was housed throughout the entire multi-phase construction, so we were able to do it in pieces. And if you know of one of those buildings here in Arlington, let us know.
So just to...
I'd love to find one.
In the, after the vote in the spring of 19, if it's successful, in the 1920 school year, there's going to be planning about, you know, where to place students. And we'll look at all sorts of different options, from modular classrooms to possibly another school. We could have a conversation with Minuteman about their building when they vacate that, move into the new one. So there's different options. There's a question over here.
Yeah, hi. In each of the options you showed diagrammatically, and you mentioned verbally parking, and in most cases it looked like in the cross sections the parking was structured for sure, and we know there'll be some surface parking as well. Some of that parking was below grade. Let's not forget that, and I'm sure you know this as an architect, any structured or below grade parking space, it's going to cost us in total about $25,000 to $50,000 per space. So let's keep that in mind when we're thinking about parking and how much is needed. And I think it really sort of behooves the town and the design team to look at every available avenue to make sure we're capturing bus riders and kids walking and biking. And certainly there's a good number who are doing that right now to the school. But we have this amazing resource that's about 200 feet from the school, the Minuteman Path, and there's zero connection to it now, which is really appalling. And I would love to see just a great, seamless, beautiful connection from the Minuteman right to, you know, a secondary entry of the of the high school, and that will really allow us to minimize the parking and save a whole lot of money. Thank you.
Agreed, and our site diagrams actually include that.
The question over there.
This may be a question for Dr. Janger. Which of the alternatives work particularly well for adjacencies and future flexibility?
So I'm trying to think of whether I should tell you my favorite, which I try to avoid because I have an opinion. You know, I think they all have different advantages, and I think you really have to, as you work through the different things, you know, as I've worked more and more with Lori around this, you put something here and you say that's not close to that thing, and you can move it. To be honest, I suspect all of them in various different ways can be adjusted to do it better. The ones that are more compact to me, I think make it easier to get from any place to any place else. The ones that are more sort of conceptually simple, to me, I think make it easier for wayfinding in the school and for layout. And so, some of the ones I think where you sort of see sprawls in all kinds of directions and you can't figure out the logic behind the school, I think those, my impression and my sense is that those are going to be harder for sort of people to collaborate and coordinate and supervise. But I think we'll see as we go forward. It was really hard enough to tell you my favorite, though.
Have you had the opportunity to provide like high-level build time estimates for each of the options or each of these ideas?
Not necessarily specific to each one because we haven't done any phasing for them yet. I'd say it's 3 to 4 years.
From start to finish?
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, so thanks for your presentation. And I appreciate option 7 and you exploring that because it helps to get people to think about what they might like or not like. Interesting, what I like about that option is it seems to be the quickest. 20 months seems to be the cheapest. However, I like open spaces and I like old buildings too. So is there a way, I was trying to fold the paper over and look at it, to have a bar like that, but not have it be as up on the street? And if you could keep the Fusco and column, and in some of your descriptions when you were, well, just, in thinking out of the box, because if we don't do it now, we never do it, right? That in some of your descriptions about approaching or experiencing those buildings after you enter a building, because if we kept those two, that would allow that bar in front to be smaller, perhaps, less right up on the street and get a little bit of breathing room. So just a question or thought.
Yeah, the things that drive a lot of layouts in school buildings is the need for windows. So it is one of the drivers. And so, for instance, that bar that we're talking about really is all windows and all classrooms on all sides, with the sort of gym and auditorium and cafeteria, everything else in the middle that don't need light. So if you think about it like that, and they are currently sort of right up against the front, as you pointed out, Fusco and the other. It's just a matter of how you get them to, how you absorb a building like Fusco and still keep all its windows and things like that. So it's a little bit of a push and pull, kind of how Matthew was describing just the layout. In terms of the plan, it's the same with capturing the light and having spaces work. But we're like I said, we're still lots of diagramming to go. So thank you for that.
I realize it's still early in the design. Sorry, over here.
Oh.
But just on the topic of light, I guess I'm also interested if you guys have any indication already which of these plans sort of create the best sort of quality of interior experience for the students. Like one of the things that makes me a little bit sort of cringe is the thought of like a cafeteria in the basement with no natural light, which I realize like other things maybe need light more than that, but can you say a little bit about the options here and sort of what kind of trade-offs you're making?
I can say that every cafeteria is going to have natural light in all of them, no matter what, because that's one of my peeves as well. It's the current cafeteria actually does have some natural light, but it's so low ceilinged and unwelcoming. I've been in the building lots of times where I'm crossing paths with kids that are eating their lunch in the hallway someplace else because they just don't like the cafeteria. So that's not good. So it's hard to, how do I put this? Any option that we're going to explore going further is going to have, the extensive natural light and, at this stage, there's a lot of goals. The building committee has set a lot of goals about sustainability, about, all kinds of things. And so at this stage, we very simply say every option is going to have, and to the extent possible, all of that. Just like it's always going to meet the educational program. So we try to step, at this stage in the game, we try to step back from that. We just know that that's coming later, and right now, some of the things that we're pointing out, what's a higher priority, and what do we think about building here versus building here, and keeping this building or not keeping this building. That's kind of the level we're at right now.
I'm just confused about the community entrance, because the community mostly wants access to the cafeteria, the gym, the performing arts, but I notice the community entrance is often somewhere else. So, but I may be misunderstanding what.
Yeah, I should have taken that off. So our goal was to provide more than one main way to get into the building. So the choice may be used that at a given time of day or night, that's the one that you use. That's going to be driven by the administration, not by the building. It's more of, it's such a large building, and with the grade change from front to back, it just makes sense to us that you should have an ability to comfortably and welcomely, that's not a word, way of coming into the building. And so how it's used is going to be, again, up to the school administration.
Getting back to the drop-offs, I'm thinking about the bus drop-offs with METCO and athletic teams, visiting teams, departing teams. Are you thinking they'd be coincidental with perhaps a front drop-off, or do we need also something for access to the athletic fields using that Mill Street? Could you maybe talk about that?
So, well, a couple things. When we do, sort of make a more compact footprint and shift things around a little bit, we definitely can see the flow and the possibility of having drop-off at the back just as easily as we do now in the front. The other piece that will happen in our next phase is doing a traffic study. And so the traffic study will do a couple things. They'll sort of analyze what's happening now. So the questions of how many cars can drop off parents and things like that, we'll know the exact numbers of what happens on peak mornings and afternoons. The other thing that they'll do is they'll look at the different scenarios that we decide to further explore and analyze the best ways to use them. And so we have certainly the Millbrook connection. We also have an underused connection to Grove Street. We're also talking about creating a bike and pedestrian access from Minuteman. So, the bike path. So trying to use all points around the site to help alleviate any one point being the only way to come and go to help the flow is what we'll be exploring and looking at. But because you're right, I mean, the lab program alone, they could have 20 vans coming on a given day, which is why they're also scheduled a little later for arrival and dismissal. So in the preschool, I think most heavily the preschool is used by the teachers that are there. So they come and park, and so they're not doing as much drop-off, but there certainly is still drop-off for that as well and pick-up. So there's a lot of activity on that site, as you guys know. I have one here.
I just have a question about the historic preservation component for the options where you're saving aspects of the older buildings. Do you feel, it's sort of in your professional judgment, that those buildings can be rehabilitated and still appropriately meet the programmatic requirements that have been defined, or are they just really beyond the suitability of accommodating programs? So just trying to get a sense of, are we throwing good money at bad buildings versus just rethinking the whole thing?
Yeah. So you're referring to Fusco and Column in particular. Yeah. So in terms of Fusco, it actually has really good bones and good sized rooms when they're not being divided up weirdly. So we think it has a lot of potential to be a great classroom building. And also that central core piece. And I think, again, Matthew talked about having Old Hall and the Pit, and those are sort of anomaly, unique spaces. They're not anywhere on MSBA's list of spaces, but they're really heavily used, and they're unique, again, to the school and to the community. And so Column, really what we're talking about is that whole upper part, which we're exploring opening up and really giving a new life to it, a new purpose. I'm not sure how many people know the fact that that Column House actually used to be Low Auditorium. So there's a lot of volume and open space in there before they put a floor in and put a ceiling in to create the science classrooms. It's a big space. I've been up there. It makes my knees a little weak. It's so high. But it's an interesting space. And so it would be repurposing, but to something it's never was used for before. So I think it would be very interesting. And for the most part, that's the main, those upper floors of column are the most important ones. The lower ones, you know, it's just floors. They'd be all opened up and changed, so.
Laura, you had a written question up there?
I do have a question up here.
Yep.
And the question was regarding the, I'm assuming it says admin, I'm assuming it means district admin space. And the question was, coined was, does it have to be at the school? And is there any other spaces for it to be at the school? And will MSBA pay for it? So the answer to the first question is no, it doesn't have to be, but because the answer to the second question is we don't have any other place for it, it will likely be at the high school. And the last question is no, MSBA does not pay for district admin offices.
Hi. What's the nature of the site contamination at the high school?
So without getting too jargony here, so we have two different forms of contamination. I'll just say one's at the front of the building and one's at the back of the building. So it's distinctive between what grade you're at. And the front of the building is a contaminant that's more of a vapor, more of an air. So when you're standing out in the front green, you don't know about it. It only matters when you're in an enclosed space. And so buildings need to be properly ventilated. And we need to, if you ever have dealt with radon, it's a similar idea of that, where you need to be able to stop the vapor and the gases from under the building to get into the building. And so there's a way of doing that. We would put that system in place, whether it's renovation or new. Either aspects will get this system that it's really just think about it, it's just moving the gas up and out and out of the building, and that's all you have to do. The other one I'm sure you're also more familiar with than I am, but it's the chromium, which was the, I'm going to call it a spill, but I'm not sure if that's the right word, but just the contamination that happened from the former industry that was at the current DPW site. And that pretty much contaminated the DPW site and the whole back part of our site. And some years ago, again, you all know, it was capped. The fields were capped. And by capping, it basically means putting a sandwich of good soil. It might be 4 feet or 3 feet or whatever the dimension needs to be. And that was done for the site. But a building and blacktop, the pavement, counts as capping. So where our building is and where our pavement is around the building, nothing special has been done to that because it was already sort of capped in its existing condition. Once we start tinkering around, we need to think about it and plan for it and highly likelihood cap any part that we're working on that's going to remain open. So it's, again, similar to the treatment that was done in the rest of the site, the back part of the site.
Do any of the different designs have significant differences in the ability for kids to get from one area to another between classes easily and for handicap accessibilities? Because it's one of the big challenges right now.
The building will be fully accessible. So we imagine a building of this size would have 2 and possibly 3 elevators. So it wouldn't be a matter of having what happens now where a kid has to get all the way to the elevator at Fusco to get anywhere if they're on crutches or whatever. And in terms of, that's one of the things we're analyzing in terms of its circulation and working again with the school administration and really making sure that adjacencies are the best they can possibly be. And that, I'm not kidding, this will be going on for another year, so I'm not going to sit here and say everyone's solved and they're doing exactly what they're supposed to. It's a process. So, but those are very important points. Yeah.
Any more questions?
I missed the beginning, so if this was addressed, forgive me. Any differences in cost and time between renovation versus new construction?
So the range of the different options are from, at this point, just based on square footage, are between $287 million and $311 million. But we're just at, so it's a roughly $300 million project. It's not a big swing. The least expensive one is number 7. Building new on the front of the building. Time, Lori?
I'm throwing out 3 to 4.
Yeah.
Again, we don't know until which option we're doing and how
Yeah.
that phasing looks and whether there's a swing space and all those factors.
Yeah, but in all likelihood, the timing we're looking at is if the town votes affirmatively in the spring of 19, in the 1920 school year, we'd be mapping out the whole phasing of the project. In the summer of 2020, we would begin the work. We would end by the summer of 2024 in all likelihood. But kids will still be getting educated during that time. And they'll learn all about construction, right? So, yeah. Yep.
I was just curious if you built the new building right up on Mass Ave, what would be the required frontage? Like there must be something that says you have to have at least so much off the street.
So this diagram only just came out in the last few days, so I don't have the exact number. I bet you Adam probably knows. I'm going to guess it's probably 20 feet at least. A setback, sorry, yes.
All right. Well, let's take one quick, yep.
Will there be a life cycle cost assessment for the existing building versus new building?
Yeah, that's part of the design process is to do that for all the systems and everything.
Okay, I'm now going to introduce Amy Spear from our committee. Amy is on our communications subcommittee, and we've designed a process to get everyone's input on the preferred, your thinking on the preferred option. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. So we have a few questions for you today. One is we've got a survey that we're going to pass out just to kind of get a sense from the community on a few key areas, a lot of which Lori talked about tonight, and your sense of, you'd like it or you wouldn't like it. And then we're going to give you 3 stickers. So as Jeff and Lori mentioned, where we are in the process right now is we're just at the massing diagram phase. And in the next couple of weeks, we need, as a committee, we are going to narrow these 8 options down to 3 preferred, 3 options that we want to explore further. So we'd like to get a sense from you tonight what your top 3 items are. So as we have the great reveals, HMFH has diagrams all around the room here. And you've got 3 stickers. Go around, take a look. They might have been hard to see up on the screen here. They also have a few floor plans. You can see there's a lot of thought that's gone into this process, so that you've got the rest of the evening really to cast your opinions and your votes on all of these. And yeah, we'll take it from there. And then there is one last forum that will be June 4th, where these 3 options, HMFH is going to take 3 options the committee will decide in the end of April, and then by June we'll have more details on what those 3. So these massing diagrams will have more details, site access, all of that will have more details. So please join us June 4th, because that's when it's really going to get really fun, because then we have to go down to 1 preferred option in July. And if you haven't been on our website already, it's ahsbuilding.org. We keep it updated. We have a Facebook page, so there are lots of ways to keep informed with the project. And we also have, thank you, Kiersey. We have cards, so if you have questions that weren't answered, if you have specific feedback, questions, concerns, ideas about any one of these sites, you can use these cards. If it's a general question, you can hand it to me. If it's a question or concern or feedback about a specific one of these 8 options, there are envelopes at each of these options. So please, we want to hear as much feedback as you can give us tonight. And the stickers are coming. Somebody just asked me what you do with the stickers. So on these massing diagrams with the bullets, just place your sticker on that option. If you like option 1 and that's one of your top 3, place one of your stickers there. If you like, and then you can just disperse them. You can't put all 3 on one.